wow, I'm really lucky that the world has changed enough that I don't have to focus on like being a woman in a man's world. I can like just be a human in a human's world.
I never really thought of myself as a woman captain. And Clearwater was certainly a good environment where it wasn't particularly pointed out to you what you were or weren't.
Oh, that's so cool, you're a woman captain. And it was like, you don't want to have any reaction, really. You don't want to be a woman captain, you just want to be a captain.
Hi. I'm happy to see everyone here in this webinar. I see over 100 people have joined us already, so thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of She Sailor Sea Stories. If you don't know me, my name is Amali Knobloch, and I serve on the board of the National Women's Sailing Foundation. Tonight is extra special for me because I'm also the Outreach and Engagement Manager at the Hudson River Sloop Clearwater, the organization whose legacy inspired me to bring this event to life. So I wanted to take this opportunity to thank Debbie Huntsman, the president of the board of the National Women's Sailing Association, for allowing me to take up not one, but 2 nights of programming to toot the Clearwater horn. Clearwater is an organization, if you don't know, that launched in 1969 as a beacon of the Hudson Valley and was created to raise awareness about the environmental conditions of the river that we sail on. Since then, through 50 years of public programming, almost 500,000 people have crossed the deck of the sloop, many of whom's first direct interaction with the river took place on board with the captains and the crew. So tonight, in honor of Women's History Month, we're going to celebrate the legacy of 3 of those captains, Kate Cronin, Betsy Garthwaite, and Cindy Smith. There is something really special about the Clearwater community that has a storied past of female or female presenting leadership from on board the sloop all the way up to the board. Knowing how tough it can be a woman aboard any boat, let alone a tall ship, we thought it was important to share the stories of women who belonged and led this community, free from many of those negative experiences or disappointing behaviors that many of us experience on board, all different. Betsy Garthwaite, who many of you may know, who was the captain of the Clearwater from 1992 to 1996. Many of you may also know her as the board president for a period of time, and really has been critical in helping get this event together, who has maintained a log of all of the captains, not just the female captains, and keeping them together, keeping their contact information up to date, and making sure that that community stays knit. So thank you, Betsy, for joining us.
Thank you, Amali, so much. And, you know, when I was invited to participate in, and also I want to just thank everyone who's attending and welcome them all tonight, because I know I do know many of you. But when I was invited to participate in this evening's storytelling event, I thought to myself, well, you know, how does anyone distill, you know, 4 years as captain of the sloop Clearwater, plus all of the years I spent on the crew before that, you know, into just a few minutes? And I thought about it, and I remembered 2 sails I did as captain that were just standouts for me. And that's what I wanted to share this evening, because I believe that when the river and the sloop and people come together, sometimes we can create magic. And this is a photograph of me dressed up as my superhero alter ego, Captain Midnight. And this is actually a photo taken during Pumpkin Sail at the Piermont Pier. And Captain Midnight knew a thing or two about magic. So I remember this one sail out of Liberty State Park, Jersey City, New Jersey. on a rather breezy day. It was 1994, I think, and we were taking out a group of 4th or 5th graders, the typical age for a Clearwater educational sail. And they were from a nearby school. They were inner city kids, what we used to call disadvantaged, mostly kids of color. And the Sloop's educator had gone ashore to greet the group, which is the usual way, and then divide them into 5 smaller groups that were each assigned to a volunteer crew member. And then one by one, the students, the teachers, other adult chaperones, and the crew members boarded the vessel, except for this one boy who was refusing to come out with us. And I could see his teacher pleading with him and then losing her patience because she's saying, you're holding up the whole group. And if you don't come out and you stay behind, you're going to have to wait for 3 hours on the school bus. And one of the teachers is going to have to stay behind with you. And it was very obvious to me that her tactics were not working and that this kid was legitimately very scared. He had probably never been on a boat before in his life. He had, let alone a sailboat. And he, probably didn't know how to swim. That was my guess. And I said, look, can I talk to him? And he said, yes. So I said to this kid, I said, in all the time I've been captain of this vessel, I have never lost anyone overboard. And I am not planning on doing that today. But I understand that you're anxious about this experience. And if it would make you feel safer, then we can put you in a life jacket. Would you be willing to try that? And by some miracle, he said, okay. And like I said, it was a breezy morning. I had already instructed the crew to tuck in one reef, and I was waffling about a second. And this is a photo taken several years earlier on a day in May of 1986 when you were Captain, Kate, of the sloop sailing in New York Harbor with a single reef tucked in. There's some other notable things about this photograph, but I won't take the time this evening. But I was sure that this kid wasn't the only kid who was nervous. He wasn't the only kid who had never been on a boat before, who was afraid, who didn't know how to swim. And yet, with a group of nervous kids, you don't want to heel over too far because that will just make them more nervous. But if you shorten sail too much, then the sloop's not going to be able to get anywhere without using the engine. And then those kids are going to go through the rest of their lives thinking that sailboats are like incredibly boring, and so was their entire Clearwater experience. And I decided to stick with a single reef. So we got off the dock and motored out of the channel, which brings you past the backside of Lady Liberty. And I always remember this vantage point of the statue, which is not what you see if you're taking the Staten Island ferry, because the heel of her enormous right foot, as you can see, is lifted up off the ground, which gives her this sense of movement, like she's walking, moving forward, leading the way with her torch held high. And we motor across the harbor and to the anchorage off of Brooklyn, a spot known as Bay Ridge Flats, to set our trawl net. And we trawl for about 4 or 5 minutes to collect a sampling of fish that we will use later in the program for educational purposes. And then with all of the students helping, we raise the sail. So this next photo is not from that day. It's just a generic photo of kids raising sail, like a whole bunch of them, maybe 20 on one halyard. It turned out that day that the amount of sail I had up for the amount of wind was just absolutely perfect. We were like moving really nicely through the water, but what was even just as perfect was that we had my favorite conditions for a Clearwater sail. We had, the wind was opposing the direction of the tidal current. So no matter what point of sail I was sailing at, you know, close hauled, downwind, I could make way across the bottom. I could actually get somewhere. And that kid, I can't say for sure, but I'm pretty sure I remember that he had his life jacket off before the sail was even over. He had a good time. And I think most of those kids had a good time. And this is another photo, which is not from that day. But I love this photo because you look at those faces and you see how invested those kids are in what they're doing and how important they must feel doing that, steering this big ship. And that is magic. That is just magic. But whatever happened to that boy, I'll probably never know unless I meet him one day and we figure out that we have this shared experience. But I like to think that he came away with, you know, positive memories of his experience that day, and that he learned something about fear, and that we don't always overcome our fears. I don't think we do, but we learn how to not let them get in our way. The second half of my story involves someone with no fear of the river. And this is, this is a sail. I'm pretty sure I remember we were transiting from Garrison to Beacon with members of the Brooklyn Sloop Club, which was one of Clearwater's charter clubs. And if you don't know the Hudson River, Garrison is located across the river from the United States Military Academy at West Point. And it's a portion of the river, a section of the river known as the Hudson Highlands, where a glacier carved through the Appalachian mountain chain during the last ice age. It's a very tricky place to sail because the winds are fluky because of the hills, but it's incredibly beautiful. And the Brooklyn Sloop Club, this is a photo taken of the sloop in the Highlands. The Brooklyn Sloop Club was on board for their annual sail, and they came with lots of food to share. Somebody from that group, I remember, brought Chinese pork buns every year. I remember the box of Chinese pork buns. Anyway, we were having a pretty good time. And when we sailed north past Storm King Mountain, which is the northern terminus of the Hudson Highlands, I could see there were a couple of windsurfers skidding across the water at the southern edge of Newport Bay. Now, some windsurfers will make you nervous because they're inexperienced, and inexperienced windsurfers fall a lot. The last thing you want is for a windsurfer to fall when they're crossing your bow, because that will give you a heart attack. But there were two spots on the river where I knew I could count on very skilled windsurfers. And these windsurfers, they would come out even if it was blowing 25 knots or more. And one spot was Kingston Point. And this is a photo of a windsurfer off of Kingston. And you can see from the water that the wind's probably blowing pretty good there. The other spot I could find skilled windsurfers was the lower end of Newport Bay. And this is a shot taken from the Clearwater, looking south from Newport Bay towards the Highlands. That's Storm King Mountain on the right. So these two windsurfers that I had spotted, they didn't concern me at all. And at a certain point, the one guy crossed so close past our stern that we literally probably could have reached out and handed him one of those delicious pork buns. And he called out to us with words that I will remember for the rest of my life. He said, "Clearwater, it's thanks to you that we're out here." And I was like, wow. All of the hard work, all of the heavy lifting, all of the millions of dollars that the Clearwater organization and its thousands of members had invested in educating and inspiring people and in cleaning up the Hudson River from 1965, when the sloop was just a twinkle in Pete Seeger's eye, up until that moment, almost 30 years later, had been just summed up in a single sentence. It's thanks to you that we're out here. The river wasn't an open sewer any longer, and this is another image of Newburgh Bay. This is taken from the Newburgh waterfront, looking across the river to Beacon. And this photograph was taken in April of 1970, and the sloop has just departed Beacon and is headed to Washington, D.C. to lobby for the Clean Water Act. So the river is no longer this open sewer now when we're out there on the bay with the windsurfer. It's a place, a beautiful place where you could go windsurfing, and if you fell, you weren't afraid of getting wet. So the river works its magic, and that's my point. And it's not stingy with its rewards. It has certainly worked its magic on me, because I think it changes the way you listen and what you listen to. And it demands that you pay attention to the wind and tides. But most importantly, I think it changes the way you view the world. Because just like the statue looks very different from behind, the world looks very different from the surface of the river than it does from the river bank or from the top of a mountain miles away. It makes you think differently. It makes you ask different questions. It makes you set different priorities and make different choices, and not just for yourself, but for other people and other living things as well. And that's what I mean when I talk about river magic. So I wouldn't trade my time sailing aboard Clearwater for anything in this world, because yes, that is the Hudson River. That is the west side of Manhattan. And those are the flukes of a humpback whale. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Betsy. It really speaks to, I think, my experience on board, feeling like, people don't really get it until they get it. They don't get it until they're on board in the middle of the river looking at New York City or looking at the Highlands. And that is the moment, which is why our ed program is so rewarding, that people are really enwrapped with the world that is around them. And I think that's that moment, that Hudson River magic, where they think about the environment that they're in a different way than they have, maybe their whole lives. Well, thank you for sharing that. That was wonderful. And it's really going to share a little bit more about the strength and